Good afternoon. Welcome to this year's Heritage Society Spring Lunch. My name is Eugene Lambert, and I'm the designated chairman of the Heritage Society. I'm really delighted to have so many friends of GW here with us today. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome GW Provost Steve Lerman and his wife Lori, who are attending their first Heritage Society luncheon with us today. President Knapp and his wife are unavoidably traveling today, but they do hope to be with us for our infamous holiday tea in December. As president of the as chairman of the Heritage Society, I take great pleasure to let you know that our membership has reached an all-time high of 581 individual members. "35 members joined us this year. They're listed in their program. If you are one of the new members this year, I would appreciate if you would stand up so we could recognize you. Any new members here in the house? Great, great. Thank you. We unfortunately lost several members also listed in the program. Our thoughts are certainly with their families at this time. We seem to have luckily dodged what looked like might have been some ugly invitations from Mother Nature, and I think you'll enjoy the program as well. First, I want to see if I can introduce some people here from the university. Dr. Peg Barrett, who is Dean of the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, is right there. I had down that Lou Katz, who is Senior Vice President and Treasurer, was supposed to be here, but I don't think I see him. If I missed him, nope. Is Professor Christopher Bracey, who's the Senior Associate Dean at the Law School. There we go. Thank you. A new person to GW in the last few months, Mark Kennedy, Director of the Graduate School of Political Management. Right there. As I said, Provost Steve Lerman and Professor Frank Sesno, both of whom are going to get more prolonged introductions. Finally, I'd like to ask that the university's planned giving staff stand up to be recognized. They're listed in the program. And in addition, we have other senior development staff here today, all helping us provide what we hope will be lasting legacies for GW. Since last July 1, they've worked closely with alumni and friends who've made new commitments with more than $20 million in planned gifts. So a round of applause for the staff that helped make that. Now I'd like to introduce GW Provost Steve Lerman, who will talk about the state of the university and show a special video entitled Power and Promise. As many of you know, Steve L. or Steve 3, depending upon how you distinguish among our run of Steves, came to GW in 2010 from MIT, where he served as Vice Chancellor and Dean of Graduate Education. Indeed, Steve spent his entire academic career until he came to GW at MIT, having earned a BA and Master's in Civil Engineering and a PhD in Transportation Systems Analysis. He joined the MIT faculty in 1975 and twice served as chair of the faculty. Here at GW, Steve has overseen a number of major initiatives, including reorganizing the relationship among the 3 schools that now constitute our medical center, overseeing detailed planning for the Science and Engineering Hall, scheduled to open in 2015, and developing expanded research opportunities for undergraduates. He has worked to create a stronger identity for the Mount Vernon campus, the Vern, where he resides with his wife, Lori, who's also here with us today. Dr. Lerman is currently leading the development of the strategic plan that will guide GW during the next decade. Dr. Lerman.
Well, thank you, Gene, and thank you for that kind introduction. And I very much want to thank you for your dedication as chair of the Heritage Society. We cannot overstate the appreciation we all have for the work you've done and the work of everyone here who has helped contribute to the success of the university. There are a tremendous number of things going on at GW. This is just an amazing time in the university's history. And in just a few minutes I have, I probably can only sort of take you racing through the things that are happening. We've been thinking of this period in the university's history as the decade of transformation, as we move towards the university's 200th celebration, 200th anniversary celebration. Gene just mentioned the construction of the Science and Engineering Hall. This will be the largest capital project GW has ever undertaken, and the largest research and education facility dedicated to science and engineering in the District of Columbia. This will be a landmark building and a landmark location. We're going to break ground on a new public health building. The School of Public Health and Health Services has outgrown its quarters that they've shared with the School of Medicine in Ross Hall. As that group has continued to grow and thrive, we've come to the realization we need a new place for them. And so that building will begin in mid-May. We're going to begin construction of a new university museum, and that will house the Albert Small collection, which was gifted to us by Albert, and it will also become the home of what is now the Textile Museum. And the Textile Museum will merge into GW, and its collection will be displayed there, and we're creating an archival storage facility, which is temperature and humidity controlled in Virginia, that will mostly be used for their collection. We're going to be renovating the Gelman Library. What we now think of as the ground floor will no longer be the ground floor. What will happen is what we now call the second floor will become the entryway, and you'll come up through Kogan Plaza rather than H Street. Once we finish that, we're going to be building the new Churchill Center in honor of the collection of Winston Churchill that will be gifted to us by the Churchill Society. And some of you actually, I know, last night were at the Churchill Society dinner, in which 400 people were there to honor one of the Churchill Society's leaders, but GW was prominently mentioned as the new home for the Churchill Society. The strategic plan for the university is really going to be the guidepost for how we're going to be moving forward in the future, in this next decade. And I don't have time to take you through the details of it, but I thought I'd tell you the 4 themes that have emerged as we've developed this plan. The themes really cut across the entire university. So one of them is globalization. How do we prepare our students for a world that is vastly more global, in which they need to be competent not just in a national culture or even a local culture, but in a global culture, in which leadership, be it business or nonprofit or governmental, requires an understanding not just of American culture and American history, but world history and world culture. The second theme is governance and policy. How do we build upon our strength as a university that contributes to the national dialogue about critical questions and issues? How do we educate our students to be effective in analyzing alternative policies, and helping guide decisions around the key issues of our time. And that includes healthcare policy, education policy, medical policy, science policy. Critical questions both at the local and national scale, and in fact at the global scale as well. A third area is what we call innovation through interdisciplinary collaboration. And basically what we're trying to get at here is the core belief that none of the great problems our society faces will be solved through the lens of any one discipline. So problems of income inequality are not solely economic problems. They're social problems, they're health problems, they're political problems, they're regulatory problems, they're governmental problems. How do you teach students to see the world through multiple disciplinary lenses? And the same is true for sustainability, resource shortage, economic competition. All these things are going to require a very different way of students facing those issues and a very different way of doing research. And how do we as a university enable that to happen effectively and efficiently? And then the fourth area is sort of a little old-fashioned in some way, and we're calling it citizenship and leadership. How do we teach our students to be effective citizens? Not just citizens of the District of Columbia, but citizens of the country and citizens of the world. Basically, we're hearkening back to George Washington's original vision. George Washington saw higher education, and in particular wanted to create a university here in the District of Columbia to solve a particular problem. He had spent the latter part of his career creating a new country. His problem was that the citizens of that country didn't see themselves as Americans first and foremost. They saw themselves as Virginians, New Yorkers, Pennsylvanians. He saw higher education by bringing a cohort of young people to the nation's capital to be educated here as a way of imbuing in them a new sense of identity, a sense of identity that transcended their statehood, their state identity, and to see themselves as he, probably among the earliest of Americans, saw themselves, which is they were citizens of the United States of America. Well, that sort of core value of how do we educate students to be citizens at multiple levels is what I think this theme is about. And how do we educate them to be leaders in that new world? So there are many other highlights. This is a university undertaking tremendous things at this moment in time. One of the highest priorities we have as a university continues to be how do we make a GW education available to every young person who has the ability to be admitted and the desire to study here. And of course, critical to that is how we support them financially. Financial aid is the linchpin of how we create a student body that is talented, that is diverse, that brings multiple perspectives. The last thing we need is a university where everyone comes from that same thin slice of the socioeconomic spectrum. Well, making that possible requires financial aid. Almost 2/3 of our students at the undergraduate level receive some form of financial aid. And so Power and Promise is the name we've given to the campaign component that makes the case for financial aid, contributions to financial aid. So we have a short video, which I'd like to run now, that tries to show you some of the effects and some of the impact that financial aid can have. So why don't we roll that? This is a time of amazing change at George Washington University. The new buildings we're constructing, the new faculty we're hiring, and the incredible new students we've drawn to the university have really energized the place. This is a time of great promise, and certainly the faith that the donors have indicated through their donations have helped fuel and support those great changes. Power and Promise is the name we give for a campaign to encourage donors to fund scholarships, fellowships, and other forms of financial aid. They allow students to fulfill their promise of their intellectual abilities, and they give them the power to come here to GW.
I would not be where I am today with the job that I have without an MBA from GW. There's no question about it. I think scholarships are incredibly important because it continues to foster this sense of community. The fact that I received a scholarship let me know that somebody out there that went to GW actually cares about me as a student and has been successful enough to help me along my path.
The donations to George Washington University come from a huge spectrum of our alumni body and sometimes from non-alumni, but many of our donors have a special affinity for giving for scholarships.
My name is Masoud Wajdani. I have two children going to GW, a son named Aryan and my daughter Yasmin. I came to this country from Iran in 1975 for search of better life and education. During my school years in the United States, the revolution in Iran happened and the money flow stopped. I remember very vividly the day that a lady came into the class and sort of said, "You come out." I still remember her finger at me, and she pulled me out and said, "If you do not pay your tuition, do not come back to a class." So finishing school was very difficult. I had set my mind. I said, one day I change that. And if I could help someone else not to have that finger at them, I will make sure that never happens. How about if my wife and I could help two other students like our kids so they could make a difference? My wife and I try to do as we believe that hopefully our children learn to do this exact the same.
Well, let's see, we're talking about 1949. It was very, very different than it is now. Very excited about GW. I made friends easily and quickly. It was fun to go to the student union. I had a legacy of $250, so that took care of my first tuition. And then after that, I wasn't going to be able to continue unless I got a scholarship. When the envelope came through, I was so excited I just could barely open it. Lo and behold, I had been accepted. And I was thrilled because that meant I could go to GW.
When you endow a scholarship, you're looking ahead not just 5 or 10 years, but 50 and 100 years. Donations that might have happened 1, 2, 3, 4 generations ago are still supporting students and supporting the activities of the university.
I studied psychology and graduated in 1954 and then went on for my master's and got that. It was not easy to get ahead at that time. So I'm very impressed with the way things have changed in these years for the women who are coming forth. These are women who blew me away, and so for that reason, I wanted to support them by making a contribution.
It's an extraordinary act of generosity. And there's something wonderful about the faith it represents in both George Washington University and its ability to steward those funds and use them to help generations of students.
I so much believe in when you give to one student, that student has a better life, and from that it would be a multiple effect.
My decision to give back to the school was directly related to the support that we got from the school when I was there.
It's a tie-in that brings up some very good feelings and good memories. And it's a great pleasure to us to connect up again with an institution that gave so much to me.
Well, thank you. Enjoy your lunch, and the program will begin after dinner, after lunch is served. Thank you.
Those of you who were here last year may recall that that President Knapp and I had an impromptu jumping contest up on the podium. I'm very pleased that did not occur this year with our provost. I just want to again be sure to thank everyone here for what they are doing for GW, for their forward thinking in planning for the future of GW, and that makes a real difference. When Frank is finished, I'm going to have a small gizmo to talk to you about, but it's really now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Frank Sesno. Frank is the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs here at GW, where he teaches how the media affects the creation of public policy. First and foremost, however, he is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. His 30 years of journalism experience include 21 years, typo in your brochure, at CNN, where he served as White House correspondent, anchor, and Washington bureau chief. He is the host and creator of Planet Forward, a groundbreaking web-to-television show on PBS, as well as the host and producer of in-depth specials and miniseries on PBS, the Bloomberg Channel, and the History Channel. So I would now like to ask Frank to come up, and I think you'll enjoy his talk, Being Revolutionary from the Front Lines of History, Media, and Politics.
Well, thank you very much, Gene, and thank you to all of you. A big thank you to all of you before I begin. The magic of what we see in the classroom and in the laboratory and with our alumni is due almost entirely to the support that we get in every aspect from our GW community. So let me just echo what Provost Lerman said and what you saw in that marvelous film, that without support and encouragement and occasional prodding from our friends and from what you do, none of this would be possible. So thank you to you, and let's start with that. So I was asked to talk personally and about being revolutionary, and I sort of thought about the revolutionary thing because revolutions are kind of fun. You know, I'm direct the School of Media and Public Affairs, and as I like to say, I'm from the media, and I'm here to help. And no one really understands what that means. And we're from the media, and so how many of you have smartphones? How many of you have cell phones? How many of you have remote control at home when you watch your television? Okay, so I also like to say that we in the media, if you're not born with attention deficit disorder, we will teach it to you. And that's, you know, quite a challenge and a burden, but we do the best we can. But the revolution part, for me, has been an amazing thing, and it's something that I enjoy engaging with our students and with our faculty who are researching it now, because we're in the middle of another revolution. Revolution of how you get your information, of how you relate to your information, of how we govern and how we're going to be governed. And if we aren't going to descend completely into chaos, how we make sense of all of this. We may descend into chaos, I don't want to mislead you. But when I joined CNN in 1984, and CNN went on the air in 1980, people said to Ted Turner, "This will never work. People will never pay for television. We have rabbit ears, they work well." Well, that changed a little bit. People said to Ted, "There's no appetite for news from around the world. You won't be able to move pictures and sound from around the world. It will cost too much. You'll never make money at it." And now, as As Jimmy Kimmel noted at the White House Correspondents Association dinner last Saturday, if you have current TV, which is where Keith Olbermann was temporarily parked, you'd be hard-pressed to see it because it's on channel 1 million. And this is part of the revolution, this explosion of information, this explosion of access. As I tell our students, put your brains around this, that never before in human history has so much information been available to so many people from so many places so fast. And so now the challenge is, how do we deal with that revolution of information? How do we make sense out of it? How do we turn it into a purposeful stream of information rather than just scattershot stuff that's coming at us and frankly confusing us? People ask me, why did I leave this great revolution and come to GW? Provost Lerman, I'm still asking myself that question. No, I did it very purposefully because I had a marvelous career, an amazing one, at CNN, at the AP, at the Voice of America, which is what brought me to Washington. But I always wanted to do something different from the very first time I started. And as a reporter, you spend a lot of time traveling around the world looking at things that don't work, looking at things and people that are broken, going to places that are without hope. And to be in a place that is filled with energy and inquiry and research and young people who are determined to go out and fix those things, that is probably the best way to spend your time. So I'm going to play a word association game, a quick Q&A with myself, and later I'll come back and take your questions. But so people ask me, who was your toughest interview ever? I think Margaret Thatcher was probably the toughest interview ever because she had those lock-on eyes like we were talking about with Bill Clinton, and she'd lock onto you and she said, "Oh, but that's a stupid question." So most people don't do that because they know they're on camera and they don't want to belittle the questioner because you never know how that might turn out. What was the funniest moment? I had a chance to interview Ronald Reagan in 1982. And people always wondered how there and together Reagan was, right? And he was, in fact, my first editor said, "Can you prove that he's got Alzheimer's disease?" in about 1982. And it, you know, obviously he ended up there, but no, he didn't. But he was sort of an actor, and you know, you have your props and people. And so we had this interview in the Roosevelt room, and at the end he stands up and he tells his baseball story. "Well, you know, when I was in Iowa," and he said, "Man, gotta go." And he turns to leave, and he grabs the handle to this big, thick oak door that went from the Roosevelt room across the hall back to the Oval Office. And the door was open into the room, and he walks on the wrong side of the door. Like the opening is here, and he walks over here. And he turned to us, and he said, "They keep moving the hinges on me." So I thought, well, you know, if that works for the president, I'm going to keep that in mind, and there will be a time when I'm going to use that line. The most inspirational moment was seeing Nelson Mandela standing in the Rose Garden of the White House. A man who had been in prison for decades, who was able to find it in himself to never to forget, but to forgive and to move on and to build. And when you do a job like this, people are people, you know, they're just people. Your governor, your president, you're people. But there are some who rise above all of that, and that was that moment for me. And the most rewarding moment actually didn't happen in journalism per se. It happened here at GW. A few years ago, some of you may remember, we worked very hard. I worked with folks over at the Elliott School, and we brought 5 former secretaries of state to campus to talk 6 weeks before the election about the next president and a world of challenges. And having a conversation with Henry Kissinger, Warren Christopher, Colin Powell, Madeleine Albright, and James Baker isn't bad for an evening, you know. But I left afternoon. It was in the afternoon, actually. But I left, and as I walked out, this student who was right next to Lisner was on the phone, and clearly he was talking to his parents. He said, wait, I'll call you back. I'll call you right back. And he put his phone down. He came running over to me, and he said, Professor says no. This is why I came to GW. And it was just a magical moment where you could see 500 lights go on in this kid's head about what he was thinking about and what motivated him. The revolution, though, that I talk about is real and it's ongoing. When communication is instantaneous, we change a lot of things. We change the way we communicate. Certainly, we change the speed with which we communicate. But what we have seen over the years is we actually change the way we behave, change the way we decide. Early on, when we were just going on the air and I was at the White House, we had a hostage crisis ongoing. In fact, you may remember TWA 847. It was held hostage on the tarmac in Beirut. It was 1986 or 7, and CNN had just been wired in the last couple of years into the White House and the State Department and CIA. Before that, we were on the outs. And that was our first big live crisis from around the world, from another part of the world. And what we saw happening was fascinating because we were told that the then National Security Advisor was talking to his staff and telling them to turn off their televisions, not to be watching the constant coverage, because they feared that by watching the coverage, by personalizing the confrontation too much, some who might have to make very difficult decisions might not be able to or might have their decision-making somehow tinged. We saw it later when we got a call one night before we went on the air with a report when we were going in, remember the Somalia incident, where we were about to report something and we were told that the Somali warlord, it was known, had satellite service at his compound in Mogadishu, and if we reported what we were about to report, they would be ready and waiting for U.S. forces, and people might die instead of being able to achieve a surprise. We saw it again very recently when Osama bin Laden was killed. The revolution continues. It just intensifies, this time not with CNN, but with Twitter, because word of that attack and of his death first moved through Twitter. This rapidly escalating cascade of information that's become an avalanche of information that now moves truly in real time has made it very difficult to deliberate, to decide, and what we talk about a lot in journalism is that the role of the gatekeeper has largely been lost. So in the CNN examples I gave you, they could come to me, which they did, and say, please don't do this, and we could consider it and make a decision and either decide to cover or not to cover it. In Twitter, it's a citizen, boom, into the Twitterverse, and that information is out there, and then it's impossible to ignore. That can be life-threatening, but it can also be life-saving, and that's the balance, and that's the very interesting and intriguing choice and challenge that we confront. You know, I share this with our students, not directly, but in terms of trying to provide some context on the world. I have had an unbelievable front row through this revolution on history. I do this now and I think, oh my God, I feel like Forrest Gump. Or maybe I'm really that old and you know, I started when I was 3, which is why I'm here today. But I mean, when I think about the kinds of things that I've seen, and I feel so privileged I was on the tarmac when our at Rhine-Main in Wiesbaden when our hostages came out of Iran. I was deployed to St. Peter's Square moments after the Pope was shot, as you may recall that terrible story. I was with Ronald Reagan because I was covering the Reagan White House when he stood at the Brandenburg Gate, amazingly, right, and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. We had gotten that speech shortly before he gave it, and we saw that line written into the speech. And we thought, this is just preposterous. Is he trying to start World War III? We thought it was the press, being the constructive, supportive group that they are, thought that this was some kind of wing it, irresponsible, very provocative line. It turns out that so did the president's national security advisors. And they repeatedly at the State Department and the National Security Council tried to take that line out of the speech. And he said, no, no, that line stays in the speech, and he delivered it, and history has proved that to be probably one of the most remarkable lines that has been uttered by an American president, because whoever, for those of you who remember, and many of you do, right, the Cold War, the Soviet Union, the evil empire, whoever would have imagined that wall coming down, never mind without any blood being shed. It was an incredible thing. I was on the air as the Supreme Court decided the disputed election, or selection, depending on your point of view, of 2000. I was there at the Bureau when we were attacked on 9/11, and we had to talk at CNN about putting cameras on the roof of our building, trained on the U.S. Capitol, because we were tracking the planes that had not yet landed. And at that time, there were 7 planes in the air that were unaccounted for. And we believed, and in fact, and we've later, of course, tragically found out, that one of them was headed for Washington. We thought it could be to the Capitol, so we trained, I don't know, Mark, were you there at that time? You were. We trained that camera on the Capitol dome, fearing that we would see the most horrendous image that one could imagine. And then I was, amazingly, at the west front of the Capitol when Barack Obama was sworn in as the first African-American president, the first multi-ethnic president, maybe the first 21st century citizen of this country. Say what you will about his politics, and I'm sure we could debate that well and late into the night, but to see the journey that this country has come on was an incredible thing, an incredible thing. I'm proud to say that in one of my more lucid moments, when I was doing some discussion about it from that day, I said there's great enthusiasm here, but let's make note that no one has repealed the laws of human nature or politics. This guy is not going to walk on water the way a lot of people are saying. So that and a quarter will get me nothing now, but I am proud of having made that observation. But I say this in the nature of revolution because I think we do live in revolutionary times in the way that our information is conveyed. And it's not all good on the front lines of the revolution. The audience is fraying. The ability for any single institution or organization to survive and define itself in these times is much more challenging. At the Seattle Times and elsewhere, we're talking about the Seattle Times because Gene's son is a photographer for the Seattle Times. At every news organization, the staff and funding has really been pounded. How many of you subscribe to the Washington Post? Okay, a good wind will blow it away. It's thin now. There's no business section anymore. They've shut down. The Washington Post shut their bureaus in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. How does a national newspaper, which now says they're not actually a national newspaper, they're meant to be a local Washington paper, do something like that? However, the flip side of all of this is that all sorts of new technologies and delivery systems are being born. How many of you have an iPad? So not so many yet. Come on, get with it. Apple's profits aren't good enough. You need to contribute. So GW will invest in Apple stock. The room will all go buy iPads, and the endowment will be taken care of forever. But iPads are changing behavior. My 86-year-old father got an iPad about a year ago and now reads his newspapers on the iPad. It's that intuitive. Our young people now, we had a fascinating little focus group with our students not long ago. And among the questions we asked them was, how many of you watch network television? One hand in the room went up. Then we asked specific shows that they were watching. And they all watched those shows. They were all network shows. They didn't realize it because they were watching it on their iPads and their laptops and through Hulu and iTunes. And what the implications for the networks are enormous, but across branding, the notion of product loyalty and brand loyalty is being upended in this. Clay Shirky is a very interesting scholar. He's at New York University, and he says that this move into social media, unlike all other forms of media, probably including what we did at CNN, is not evolutionary, but it's revolutionary. Because for the first time in human history, he argues, it's not the one to the many. I'm the New York Times. I decide, I print, I distribute, you read. But it's the many to the many. That's Tahrir Square in Egypt. That's social movements. That's Coney 2012. That's how something instantly goes viral. And that fundamentally changes the relationship of the governed and the governing. It fundamentally changes your sense of community or belonging. It fundamentally changes, if you're a leader, a political leader, how you connect, how you define community. Barack Obama, thank you very much, how you raise money. It's empowering, but it's also confusing. Here's what we've lost in that process. We've, I think, lost the process to be easily one place. We had a sort of bright, shining moment, maybe it lasted 50 years, where a president, whether it was Roosevelt or Reagan, could go on the radio or go on television and command a national audience because there was a national audience to convene around a finite group of stations or distribution vehicles. Now, Barack Obama goes on, what was the show he was on? Was it Kimmel? He goes on Jimmy Kimmel, he goes on Jon Stewart, he does Google town meetings. You have to fight through all of these to be heard. But I think that this is where the opportunity comes into, the opportunity to ignite the revolution. And this is what we're doing with our students, and this is what we're trying to connect with the next generation. They are fundamentally optimistic, they are unbelievably creative. And I'd like to share a quick video with you, if I may. The other night at the White House Correspondents Association, in front of President Obama and Michelle Obama, and yes, George Clooney, and yes, the dog from the artist who was in fact an invited guest who attended the White House Correspondents Association, we rolled, I'm very proud to say, this video from the George Washington University. Our students who are committed to this revolution, who are creating new information and telling stories across new media all the time, also have a commitment to their community. And through a program we've got called Prime Movers, our students, our GW students, work with working journalists, including the White House Correspondents Association, and they go out into 10 high schools, inner city high schools in Washington. And this video rolled in to the dinner in front of the president and 2,500 of his closest friends the other day.
Prime Movers Media. Journalists contribute to the social good, intergenerational, and it's intercultural. College interns learn from the students. The students learn from the journalists. It gives media companies an opportunity to share with young people. These are young people with dreams.
I'm Jabril Ingram, and I'm a Prime Mover.
Prime Movers is the nation's only intensive journalism mentoring program that targets urban young people.
I'm an intern here at Prime Movers Media. I go to school at George Washington University, and that's how I got into the program. To work with these kids who are so invested and so interested in the possibilities, you can drag it in. It's great to see them. Some of them do really want to become journalists and pursue it. Some of them are just becoming better writers along the way.
I want 20 shots.
Cool ones.
The good ones.
Weird angles. Like
The Prime Movers contacted us, offered to help us out in the beginning stages of restarting our newspaper, and without Prime Movers, we absolutely would not be where we are today.
My question is, what is the responsibility of journalists in explaining the roles of super PACs?
It's fundamentally changed the way the politics in this country, for reasons, by the way, in ways that we have yet to really figure this out.
Prime Movers Media is a fantastic program that gives us the chance to connect with these talented, promising young people, to walk into a classroom and ask them how many want to work in journalism. Almost all of them raise their hand.
When these journalists come into their schools to help develop them, to help them understand what it means to be a citizen and what it means to have the rights of the First Amendment, what freedom of the press means. These are life-changing experiences. So many of these kids are at a crossroads between progress and danger.
You know, growing up in D.C., I mean, it's hard growing up here. Down the street, I mean, everywhere you could go is a bad choice. You know, school is a good choice. So when you're stuck in there and you have the right people teaching you and the right people, you know, having your back, it's gonna help me succeed. And that's what, you know, Prime Moves are really doing. Without Prime Movers, I wouldn't be here right now. So hats off to Prime Movers, the program.
It's so important that kids have access to programs like this. This is a program that really works, and it really has a big impact on these students' lives.
It was just inspiring to see someone who's not that much older than me sitting behind a desk at the White House doing what they want to do and doing what they love to do.
Oh my goodness. We were really close to the Oval Office, and there was just a guy standing between me and that door.
Maybe one day I could work in the White House. Maybe I could do that, or just be a journalist like Miss April Ryan.
The leader of the free world is literally 150 feet from this point. This is the West Wing, the heartbeat not just of this nation, but the world.
You know, we have the honor of covering the White House just a few miles from here, but so often our paths don't cross with people who live just a few miles from us. Prime Movers Media brings the city closer together. It gives us a chance to both learn from each other and be inspired by each other. Everyone wins.
Many kids in this program are faced with tough choices. We want them to make the right choice. Prime Movers Media helps them make the right choice.
Not a bad commercial for GW. And for these young people who each in their own way believes in the future, believes in the revolution that they will contribute to. They are the most inspiring people to be around. They are why we show up every day. They're the way we're going to change the world. And I just thank you all very much for what you do. Thank you. It's all yours.
Frank, thank you so very, very much, and thank you so very much for being at GW. We really appreciate that. A final thank you and a small note. If you are interested in perhaps being a little bit more organized than you think you are now, our marvelous Plan Giving staff has created this planned giving guide, and for those of you who are more media savvy, a CD version of that. If you are at all interested, these will be available as you go out. And so with that, I really want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank Provost Lerman for being here. Frank, I want to thank you again for a marvelous talk. My takeaway is that in some ways the most important source of information may be one that does not produce anything itself, and that's YouTube. And I'm getting a nod from on that. So on that note, we hope to see all of you in December and again next spring. Thank you very much.